The first time Theron called her that, Leora had been elbowed deep in a broken atmospheric regulator, sweat dripping down her temple despite the station's recycled air. The young Krath had padded into the maintenance bay on all fours, his silver fur still downy with youth, and announced to the entire crew in his chirping, multi-tonal voice, "Cub Mother is fixing the air again." Leora had frozen. Her wrench clattered against metal. "Don't call me that," she'd said, voice tight, but Theron had only tilted his head, ears swiveling forward in that curious way the Krath did when they didn't understand human emotion. To him it wasn't an insult or an assumption. It was simply what she was. The wandering star wasn't meant to house Krath cubs. It was a human-designed deep space research vessel, cramped and utilitarian, built for a crew of 8 scientists studying the Outer Rim's dead planets. But 6 months ago they'd received a distress beacon from a Krath colony ship caught in a gravitational anomaly. By the time they'd arrived, the ship was breaking apart, its adult crew fighting desperately to seal the breaches while their young ones huddled in the ship's core. They'd saved 43 Krath adults and 11 cubs. The adults had been grateful, dignified and efficient. They'd integrated into the Wandering Star's routines, contributing their own expertise in quantum field manipulation and bioengineering. But the cubs had latched onto Leora like moss to stone. No one knew why at first. Dr. Chen thought it was pheromones. Maybe humans smell like Krath nursery attendants, he'd suggested, scratching his beard. Some biological coincidence. Captain Okoye believed it was behavioral. "You're the only one who doesn't treat them like refugees. You treat them like people." But Leora knew the truth. Even if she never spoke it aloud, she treated them like what they were, lost, scared, trying to be brave when everything familiar had been ripped away. She knew because she'd been there too. Different circumstances, same hollow ache. Theron was the boldest of the 11. He'd been the first to approach her in the cargo bay where the cubs had been temporarily housed, the first to ask her, in halting, newly learned human standard, what she was doing. She'd been reorganizing supply crates, creating a system that made sense, and he'd watched with those huge, amber eyes that saw too much. "You make order from chaos," he'd observed. "It's just sorting," Leora had replied. "No." Theron's tail had swished thoughtfully. "You make safe places." After that, the others followed. Kess, who had nightmares and would scratch at Leora's door until she woke. Piran and Sala, the twins who couldn't sleep unless someone was humming, and Leora hummed old Earth songs while she worked. Even Silent Mora, who hadn't spoken since the evacuation, would sit nearby wherever Leora was stationed, just existing in her proximity. The Krath adults noticed. They began bringing her gifts, precious metals from their salvaged belongings, data crystals containing their history, fabrics woven in patterns that predated their spacefaring era. She'd tried to refuse, but Elder Vesh had placed a 4-fingered hand on her shoulder and said, "You give them what we cannot right now. You give them normalcy. Accept our gratitude." But gratitude and titles were different things. Cub Mother spread through the ship like wildfire. Even the human crew started using it, half joking at first, then simply out of habit. Leora bristled every time. "I'm not their mother," she'd snap at whoever said it. I'm just here." "You're more than here," Captain Okoye had said gently one evening in the observation deck. They'd been watching a binary star system rotate in the distance, twin points of light dancing around each other. "You're present. There's a difference." Leora had gripped her coffee bulb tighter. "I didn't ask for this." They didn't ask for any of it either. The captain's words had hit harder than intended. Because she was right. None of them, human or Krath, adult or cub, had chosen this strange, improvised family they'd become. The crisis came during the 3rd moon of their journey to the nearest Federation outpost. A solar flare, unexpected and massive, had sent electromagnetic pulses through their flight path. The ship's shielding held, but several systems went dark, including life support in sections C and D where the cubs slept. Leora didn't remember running. One moment she'd been in engineering, the next she was in the darkened corridor. Emergency lighting painting everything in bloody red, her breath clouding in the rapidly cooling air. The door to the cubs' quarters was sealed, the manual override fried. She could hear them inside. Chirping, crying, the sounds young things make when they're afraid and don't understand why. "Leora, Wait for the repair team. Dr. Chen's voice crackled through her comm. She ignored him. The maintenance panel came off with a yank that split her thumbnail. She bypassed the safety protocols, crossed wires she shouldn't have touched, and felt electricity arc up her arm in a white-hot lance of pain. The door hissed open. 11 cubs tumbled out, climbing over each other to reach her, their small bodies trembling. Thurin was at the front, his fur standing on end, but he wasn't running away. He was checking behind him, making sure the others got out. "Everyone moves," Leora commanded, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "Now, cargo bay, go." They went, but Thurin stayed at her side. When she stumbled, the shock had done more damage than she'd thought. His small body pressed against her leg, supporting her weight. "Cub mother needs help," he called ahead in Krath, and suddenly Kess and Piran were there too, their combined strength enough to keep her upright. Dr. Chen found them in the cargo bay 20 minutes later. Leora sat against a supply crate, her burned arm cradled against her chest, surrounded by 11 cubs who refused to move more than a foot away from her. Thurin had positioned himself directly in front of her, ears flat, showing his tiny fangs at anyone who approached too quickly. "Stand down, little warrior," Captain Okoye said softly, kneeling to his level. "We're bringing medical care." "She saved us," Thurin said, his voice carrying that multiple-toned resonance that meant deep emotion in Krath communication. "She always saves us." Later, after the medical team had treated her burns and Elder Vesh had personally overseen the blessing ritual for her healing, Leora sat alone in her quarters. Or she'd thought she was alone until she noticed Thurin in the doorway. "You should be sleeping," she said. He padded inside, curling up near her feet. "Cub mother should rest too." "Thurin," she sighed. "I'm not your mother," his ears swiveled. "I know." "Then why?" "Because mother is not about birth," Thurin said simply, with the profound wisdom that children sometimes possessed. "It is about who stays, who makes the world less frightening, who runs into the dark for us." His amber eyes met hers. "You do not accept the title, but you live it every day." Leora felt something crack inside her chest, something she'd kept carefully sealed since her own family had been lost to a transport accident years ago. Tears burned her eyes and she didn't stop them. "I'm just doing what anyone would do," she whispered. "No," Thurin said, resting his head on his paws. "You do what a mother does." She didn't argue anymore. When the Wandering Star finally docked at Federation Outpost Kepler 7, the Krath families who'd lost their cubs had already been notified. They waited at the airlock, grief and hope warring on their faces. Leora helped the cubs prepare, making sure each one had their belongings, straightening the small tunics the ship's fabricator had made. When the door opened, she expected them to run to their parents. Instead, Thurin turned to her. "Will you come with us?" Leora looked at the waiting families, at the crew behind her, at the life she'd built among the stars. "This is where you go home, Thurin." "Then you are home too," he said. "Because home is where Cub Mother is." The other cubs echoed him, in Krath and Broken Standard both. "Cub Mother. Our Cub Mother." She'd never accepted the title, but standing there watching 11 small beings who'd survived the impossible look at her with absolute trust, Leora realized acceptance wasn't the point. Love rarely asked for permission, and sometimes, family wasn't what you were born into. Sometimes, it was what you chose to become. Even when you were just trying to survive, to help, to make the universe a little less cold for those smaller than yourself. She knelt down, and 11 cubs rushed forward. "Okay," Leora whispered into their fur, their warmth, their impossible faith. "Okay." Behind her, Captain Okoye smiled. Ahead, the Krath families waited to welcome home not just their cubs, but the human who'd become something more than she'd ever intended. The title didn't matter. What mattered was that she'd stayed, and in the end, that was everything.